the American led idea of neoliberalism, which is let's give up the socialist guilt of the past and let's have enjoy the good life, and that each of us basically need to promote our own happiness through more and more consumption. I think it's a combination of the three that has made the Indian middle class particularly divorced from, and I think that I would say it's evident even in Indian origin, South Asian origin middle class young people growing up in their second generation here, because if they're not engaged in issues of inequality and injustice back home, how much are they engaged here? I spent some earlier times when I've come, as I work with the homeless, I've spent a lot of time visiting homeless shelters in some cities and trying to understand the work. And I was told consistently that the population that least volunteers for work with the homeless here in the shelters is the South Asian community. And so I think there's something that we need to confront about us. And I think it's got worse over time, and you can sort of see evidence of it in many different ways. I mean,
one example I was going to say was in today's talk in the morning, you said the heart of democracy lies in peaceful dissent.
Yes.
And if we take the recent example of protests in Kudankulam, where there is a legitimate community protesting for grabbing their land, and a foreign company coming and installing nuclear power plant would totally change the dynamics of the local community, for which it's supposed to be the greater good. And again, the middle class is silent in such issues, and that leads to the government actually being more powerful and actually curbing media from going there, which is kind of a vicious cycle where you then have international companies switch to nuclear power, come and try to play with lives of people whom they do not care, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. But silence is bad enough, and Martin Luther King, I think, somewhere said that in the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silences of our friends. And I think that silence is bad enough. And in issues like communalism, communal violence, profiling, one hears deafening silences in people. But and also when you see see slums being demolished, you see the homeless child getting.
The reason I put Kudankulam is even an NGO like AID, if it tries to support, the government goes into this kind of
saying that it's a foreign supported
saying so, which vitiates the argument as such, and then there is no no stand for you. There's no local standard to say, okay, we are not supporting it. Then again, the government will say.
And I think this might be a good segue into our next question, which is, where is the space for civil society organizations as well as civil society per se to engage in things like this? And I oftentimes feel, people like yourselves, you talked about the work you're doing with the homeless in Delhi, for example. As an individual, how do I get involved? And there'd be hundreds of individuals like myself who would like to. And having worked in the non-profit sector myself, I think one of the pitfalls is that oftentimes it's not organized enough in order for more people to come in and feel like they're being able to contribute in a significant way. So I guess the question is like the space for civil society organizations as well as for individuals to get engaged.
I passionately believe, and even whole debates that arose around Yanna agitation, which I have problems with in terms of the specifics of several of their demands. But I strongly support their right to have that agitation. The government tended to respond to the Yanna agitation in the way that it has responded generally to public protest, which is dismissive, and feeling that they'll either ignore it or they'll sort of wait it out, or they'll actively crush it. They hadn't bargained for the fact that this was one movement that was supported strongly by the middle classes, and therefore it really rebounded badly. But in the curriculum or whatever, and numerous agitations concerning people's demands for land, against displacement.
One example is like 2 weeks ago, there were people in Kudakulam fasting, and the news from those places are actually censured in a free democracy. And how the government could become so powerful is a case for saying like the silence is probably it's like silence is a war crime. That is the quote which comes to.
No, absolutely. I think that it's really important to defend the right of peaceful protest. To me, it is at the heart of democracy. It is at least as important, if not more, than the right to vote. If you look back in the last 60 years in India, think of the most important changes that have happened for the poor and the disadvantaged. Almost all of them have arisen out of public protest. I remember the Prime Minister at one point had said, in the context of the agitation, that after all it is the business of Parliament and the government to make law and policy. I think that that's only technically true. Labour legislation happened because there was organization of labour workers who demanded incrementally a set of rights. Women, domestic violence law, gender justice in general, so on, all have happened because people have organized themselves around it. The right to food, as we discussed at length in the morning, all happened because of civic organization, judicial activism, and finally pushing the executive, etc. I think the Parliament has we must respect the Parliament, but Parliament equally and the executive must equally be respectful of the right of people to organize themselves around things that you may not like. And as I said, the agitation of Parliament, I had deep problems with a lot of what they were demanding, but I was equally, in defense of their right to demand those things. And I think that we need to defend those spaces really strongly. And the government's response really was disappointing in the context of the anti-nuclear agitation by sort of going back to that old thing of saying that this is foreign funded and foreign supported.
Kudakulam has the dubious distinction of being the maximum number of sedition cases filed against them.
Really? And that coming from somebody as sort of as educated as the Prime Minister, it's really disappointing to me. I feel, and it sort of gave the signal that this dissent should be crushed on the grounds of it being, even if there was money that you guys raised from the US and sent, it doesn't delegitimize that agitation. And the failure to recognize that there is a groundswell of public anger around the issue, which needs to be answered and needs to be addressed, the government will do a huge amount of damage to itself. So the defense of the right of public protest and dissent is something that I think we all need to push for. And I've defended that, and in fact, even when I was in the IAS, I spent some years teaching new recruits to the IAS. And my first lecture always used to be the right and the duty of a civil servant to dissent. And I used to say that all your life you're going to be told that your primary duty is to obey in a democracy. And I would say your primary duty is to speak out and act according to your conscience. And if that right is there for people working within government, it is much more so for people in the wider society.
Can I stop for 1 second? We don't have an external mic. Sometimes I have that thing that projects, and there is a little bit of ambient noise.
Okay.
If all of you could, 3 of you could speak up a little bit
louder.
Sure. That would be better, I think.
Sorry,
just because we don't have a external mic.
Softly,
Which is one of the nice things about you, because and I'm going to move my chair just for some variety. I think it might be boring, so I'm just move this a little bit. I'm going to sit in front of you. I'll hold your mic.